Hello YouTube and welcome back to my channel. I got distracted from the series that I was doing. I was doing the series on the Born This Way and everything that was applied to that, including the body shaming and the LGBT blah 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 community. And so last week and the week before, I was spending my time doing a rebuttal to Sargon's video. And that was a little more the philosophy, and it was a little deeper, and I don't know if all of my points got across. Hopefully they did. If not, oh well. But this week I'm distracted again because I just got done watching Marvel's Luke Cage. And that's kind of the attention deficit, ooh, shiny kicking in. Where I'm like, ooh, this is important now. I gotta talk on this while my brain is still, still kind of excited about this. And I gotta say that Marvel has been firing on all cylinders across the board. Everything that it touches seems to turn to gold. They've been doing it right by their comic book fans and just of television and cinema in general. The best thing about what Marvel is doing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is they're tying all their properties together. This is something they don't even do with their comic books for the most part. Sometimes there's multiple versions of each superhero, like they'll have them running simultaneously. And events that affect one superhero won't affect the rest of the superheroes. That's why there's some weird nonsense about the X-Men dealing with the registration of, metahumans, the X-Men or mutants. And then, later on in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's a registration for all superheroes. And you're like, well, where were these guys when the metahuman thingy was going on? I mean, because they were separate universes. And eventually they combined them all and like, okay, this is all happening. And we've got to make this all canon. We've got to make all of these universes fit together. And so Marvel, when they got into the movies, that's kind of how they said, okay, everything that is filmed, we got to have consistency. Everything affects everything else. And that's one thing Marvel is doing amazingly. And something that DC should have done but hasn't been doing. And so that's why there's this huge, weird amalgam of DC properties where some DC shows will be really good and then some will be just kind of and then some will be like, what were they thinking there? The pretty big what were they thinking there is the new Supergirl TV show, which I don't understand at all. Because it is vaguely similar to Smallville, but it started off on CBS and then eventually went to the CW, which I don't know why it didn't start off on the CW, because that's where all the DC fans are and that's where all of the hit DC TV shows are. I'm guessing they were trying to compete with Disney, because right now Disney has on ABC they've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is a Marvel property. But then on Netflix, they've got the others. They've got, Luke Cage. They're bringing Iron Fist. They've already done Daredevil and Jessica Jones, and then eventually they're going to combine all four of those into a series called The Defenders. And I think the Punisher might join in. Maybe he'll be a recurring character that comes in every once in a while. But Supergirl just seems like a huge departure from DC, because it seems like all of their movies are going with a darker tone, this is something I think that they made a huge misstep on. It worked really well for Batman. And they tried to mirror other superheroes with that same kind of dark and gritty, which doesn't work for Superman. And that's why I don't think either of the Superman movies, like the Batman vs. Superman or the Man of Steel, were very good, because they were too dark for Superman. Superman comics are not always that dark and gritty. Occasionally there's one or the other, but as a series, they have a more upbeat kind of bright vibe, and that's why Batman, its dark tone was such a huge contrast, and that's the appeal of both of those characters. Is Superman is like the bright shiny beacon, and Batman is the shadowy justice, and you're supposed to put them together, and they're like, okay, and it makes a nice mix because there's that conflict. But for some reason in the movies, they're both dark, kind of bad guys, and apparently now Batman fires machine guns, which I'm like, what? So Superman is killing people, and Batman is using guns. So I haven't seen the full movie yet, so the things that I know about Batman vs. Superman make me not want to watch it. Maybe my opinions of that will have changed once I've seen it, and like, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I've seen, but everything I've heard people talking about it, they say it's got a darker tone. To me, that's a major misstep. That's kind of to lay the foundation that, yes, I am a comic book nerd. Not as nerdy as as a lot of people that use that label. I know way too many people who go way too deep into the weeds, and I'm like, I'm kind of more, instead of dipping my toes in, maybe I go waist deep, and some people plunge head first into it. So I'm kind of mid-range nerd on comic books. All right, that brings me to Luke Cage. And so even though Luke Cage isn't, he's not the Incredible Hulk, he doesn't have like super crazy unique powers, he's just bulletproof and strong. And it's not like, oh, wow, that's incredible, that's a unique power. It's been done to death, right? Well, the appeal of this TV show, they do an excellent job of paying homage to the blaxploitation movies that it's kind of based off of, like, Shaft and, The Last Dragon. I mean, there's mention of Bruce Lee versus Jet Li. They have discussions about boxing matches. They have discussions about chess, and it's all of these things that are generally associated with Harlem's culture, and they're basketball, and they all intertwine it into this story about a superhero. And I mean, there's all these little, it's all those little details, the little touches, the interaction between characters, the your mama jokes, the don't snitch to cops thing. I mean, I was laughing at these moments, and sometimes they were done seriously to get you to laugh, and sometimes it was the characters joking around, but either way, it felt real, which is something that's kind of lost in most of the DC TV shows that I watch, those seem surreal. Those seem kind of, okay, that's a step back from reality. None of the characters, the dilemmas they're going through are not really relatable. This felt like I was watching, one of those classic blaxploitation movies, which I think are hilarious. And it was like that, only it didn't have the terrible, grainy, and horrible, cheesy camera work and things like that. Like, I watched Black Dynamite, and that movie is freaking amazing. And they did a great job of actually spoofing a blaxploitation movie, where they did things like, where the boom mic dips into the shot and they keep the shot, or where the main actor gets punched in the face and gets really mad, and the guy who did the punching is replaced by another actor. I mean, that kind of stuff is hilarious, and it was great in Black Dynamite, since it's not a spoof. It had all the other elements of that type of film, but without the mistakes and the horrible, cheesy, low-budget production. It kind of went over and above, but I mean, everything from the soundtrack to the dialogue between the characters, it just felt like that kind of concept. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit where I said DC has been failing almost across the board on everything that they've been doing, to mention Gotham here. Because Gotham, I think, kind of does a similar thing. Gotham is about Commissioner Gordon before Batman is even a thing. And so Bruce Wayne is a little kid, but Commissioner Gordon is, solving mysteries in Gotham, and they're slowly introducing actual supervillains. It started off with just regular crimes. It had a very noir feel to it. And then as the series has gone on, they've introduced like actual supervillains with powers and things like that. But they did a very good job of making it feel like it was from the 40s and 50s, but they still had cell phone technology. It felt like it was something, it could have been a black and white series, but modernized. And that's what I think that Luke Cage nails as well, where it feels like it's from the 70s, but they still have technology and they still have references that are modern. And it's a very cool effect, where it's not quite timeless but it feels like it was set in the 70s, but also today. So Gotham kind of does the same thing, where a lot of the architecture, a lot of the sets and things like that feel like they're straight out of the 40s and 50s, but and even some of the dialogue that's right along those lines. But then they're using their cell phones, and they're using the internet, and they're talking about things that are more modern. Yeah, but Gotham is not quite as polished as Luke Cage. Luke Cage, I think, they showed a finer attention to detail, and Gotham has some areas or some lines that are just kind of cringy. I didn't see any of that when watching Luke Cage. Maybe that's because I'm a Marvel fanboy over a DC, although I always thought that I was a DC fanboy, and then eventually Marvel won me over, and so maybe now my loyalty's with Marvel. I don't know. I'm a pretty big fan of most comic books overall, so I don't think that I've got that bias strictly for Marvel, but I just think Marvel has been doing right by the fans of their comics when they made their TV shows and movies, or once they actually finally got full control over most of their properties, except for, sadly, the X-Men, which is one of their biggest properties. Wish Marvel and Fox would make nice and start working together, so that way we could see X-Men in our Avengers. It'd be so awesome. So where was I before I got sidetracked there? Okay, so Marvel has been doing really well by their comic book fans, and it's extremely obvious in Luke Cage, which I think was one of the coolest little throwbacks for fans of comic books for this, because in the series, around the middle of it, when they're actually going back and doing a little bit of his origin story and that sort of thing, he actually puts on the original costume. And he does it, it's kind of as a joke, and it's only in the show for a couple of seconds. It's not very long, but it is absolutely amazing, because I saw it, and I saw him put on or he was wearing the tiara with the metal bracers, and I was like, oh, dude, that's the costume. And then later he steals some clothes off a clothesline and puts them on, and that's the full deal. I was just cracking up and having a geek out moment, and I'm like, I wonder how many people saw that and were just like, oh, that's kind of funny, and didn't realize that's what his original character design. That was his costume, and it was so bad and so horrid. But that's what comic books were in the 70s. Yeah, that was how these characters were portrayed. You know, it was. I mean, you can look back through the comics, see these eyesores that they called costumes on a lot of these characters that are just like, ooh. What were they thinking? I mean, and Luke Cage was probably the biggest offender in the costume department, and that's why when they threw back to it and then actually just made fun of it, I was like, yes, that's because, now his modern costume is just the black hoodie with the yellow liner, which he sports throughout the series, which I thought was really cool, really well done, and actually one of the characters ended up making a joke, how many of these do you actually have? because he's always getting shot up, and he's got bullet holes in all of his clothes, and that's kind of one of a running gag that I really enjoyed. And another thing about Power Man, or Luke Cage, Isaiah Mustafa, the Old Spice guy, was petitioning to become this person. He wanted the role of Luke Cage. As soon as Marvel started doing movies, taking over things, he had an online petition to be Power Man. When I saw Mike Coulter in the Jessica Jones series, I was like, well, I would have rather preferred Isaiah Mustafa. I think he would make a much better Luke Cage than this guy. And he didn't really do much in Jessica Jones other than get shot a couple times, but he didn't really show his range or his depth in that series. In Luke Cage, he carries the show. I mean, he's a central character. So he's got to show more. He looks like the character. I think Isaiah Mustafa could have pulled it off. He's pretty cut, as you can see in the Old Spice commercials, but I'm pretty sure he would be dwarfed by this guy. But the other thing about this guy is, when they were showing him in prison, all that stuff, he shows extreme emotional range, and it's a huge contrast, or at least what I saw, was that it's a huge contrast that his character goes throughout the series. I don't think Isaiah Mustafa quite has that. He's always got the perfect smile, and a lot of the stuff that he's done is all about doing everything perfect. And that's what the Old Spice commercials are. Those are all one solid take of him doing all of the lines while, catching the things or, jumping onto the motorcycle and all. I mean, those are all one solid take. And he was also made a cameo appearance on Chuck, where it was kind of the same thing, where they were joking around about everything he touches is done perfectly. With Luke Cage, that's not quite the case. So I think they did a really good job in casting. But the other thing about this series is the music. There is a huge emphasis on the music, and some of it sounds straight from a 80s, 70s soundtrack. A lot of it sounds like it's from the 70s or early 80s. It's freaking... yeah, it's really, really good. A lot of the stuff I've never heard of, but a lot of these groups that are playing at the nightclub that's featured in the series, these are actual groups that are going around still performing. And that's why when they're on the show, there's actual, sections of it dedicated to them either practicing the songs or performing the songs. And I thought that was a really nice touch. And it's all those little details. Those little details that make this a really great series. I've never been to Harlem. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I've only known what I can see from movies and TV shows and, and books and stuff. I don't know from personal experience, but everything about this show just kind of exudes that authenticity. And one of the really cool things was, they'd mentioned the Wu-Tang Clan in little parts of the series and things like that. And then at the end, they throw in a cameo from Method Man. It would have kind of been a little bit better if they threw other members of the Wu-Tang Clan in there, but, the fact that they got Method Man on there, that's not too bad. And then I got to kind of do a little bit of harping on Method Man, because there is a little rap part that he does in the series, and I was fine with all of it except for his little part about Trayvon Martin. I was just like, but I mean, I can kind of understand why, because it's kind of a split thing where some people will think that Trayvon Martin was an innocent victim, and other people who know a lot more of the facts weren't hounded by mainstream media. When you know all of the details, you're like, oh, Zimmerman wasn't in the right, but Trayvon Martin was smashing his head into the concrete when Zimmerman shot him. So Zimmerman shouldn't have been there to begin with, but that doesn't justify Trayvon Martin smashing his head into the street, requiring Zimmerman to shoot him in order to save his own life. Big detail. It didn't get much media attention, so I can understand why someone who's kind of a celebrity and it probably not combing through news stories or listening to, alternative media sources doesn't have that part of it. But the real reason I wanted to talk about this show is the emphasis on what brings about the kind of community that is normally associated with Harlem. And so there's all the good things, people see, watching like Good Times and things like that, or TV shows and movies that are normally set in Harlem that are kind of a little more a positive spin. This kind of touches on both the good and the bad, and I think it hits them like dead on. I only know what I've seen depicted in movies, TV shows, and books. So I don't know how real all of that is, but I think they did a good job of emphasizing specific points, in that a lot of the reason that crime is so prevalent or so associated with Harlem is because of the lack of fathers, the lack of discipline, and trying to keep their young away from all of the drugs and crime and get them to focus on other things so that way they can rise above it. A lot of the characters are involved in that, and they're, or they'll make mention of the only reason that they're a part of, the police force or they're part of the good guys is because of how they were raised and because they had that opportunity, where they would have gone to crime otherwise, or they would have become part of the problem if someone hadn't been there to save them from that. And I thought that was a really good point. I thought this did a really good job of pointing out how people can get roped into the criminal element when, they didn't want to. They wanted a better life for themselves, and they just kind of got stuck to it, and it became a part of them, and they couldn't escape. I thought that was a really good point. I think they delivered it, in the right way. Poor people and minorities, they don't have a choice, when I think they seriously do, and it's painfully obvious when you see someone rise above and become better than their environment. People who rise above it and make something of themselves rather than just becoming part of the criminal element. But at least it shines a little bit on there are some people who want out, and no matter how they try to fight against it, they just get pulled in. And there's a lot of characters that are like that are sympathetic. They're not part of the criminal element because they want to be or because they think they don't have any other choice. Is sometimes they get dragged there by their friends or their family, and they're trying to fight against it, but they can't because they're not in a position of authority. I thought that was a really interesting point. And I know it's on Netflix, so I'm hoping there's a lot of people that get around to actually seeing this because it's Marvel, and I think the overall message of the series is pretty good. One thing that I don't really like about it, it does a really great job of pointing out problems with the system and problems with the community and potential fixes that don't require superpowers. But ultimately, most of the fixes are kind of like, hey, we tried all this and this wasn't working. We tried this and this wasn't working. It's going to take a super strong, bulletproof person to fix this system. and even he doesn't really fix it. They got to set it up for season 2, or if, I guess, maybe there isn't a season 2, if it just goes straight to the Defenders. So they have to have something to keep the series going, or to keep the character, involved. Because, all that's great in a fantasy environment like this doesn't really quite help in real life if people are convinced that the system is so flawed and so broken, the only thing that will fix it is superpowers. Yeah, like I said, firing on all cylinders, just amazingly consistent the whole way through. It's a really good TV show, and an even better show because it's based on a comic book. I just want to end with this. I'm on a horse.